Ever watched a glider take off, silently rising into the sky, being pulled by another plane? There's something kind of captivating about it, right? Like this elegance, this freedom to just take flight without needing like a huge runway or a noisy engine. And you sent in some really cool stuff on this. And today, what I think would be awesome is if we get into the perspective of the tow pilot, the person in that front seat. Their role is so important that the knowledge they need is pretty specific, and they're a huge part of getting a glider safely off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, glider pilots, of course, they have their own set procedures, but this document you shared, it's called GHFH12.pdf. It really lets us see what the tow pilot is thinking about, like all of the checks, the specific steps they got to follow, the weight of the responsibility they're carrying, all of that. And it all kind of comes back to, the core aviation rules, the 14 CFR parts 61 and 91, the ones that apply to, well, every pilot out there.
Okay, so let's break this down because it turns out there's a lot more to just tugging a glider along than you might think. Even just the connection between the two aircraft is pretty interesting. The source highlights two main types of tow hooks that are common here in the U.S., the Toast and the Schweitzer. Now, figure 12.2, if you're looking at it, shows you a visual difference. The Schweitzer has a single ring, but the Toast, well, it's got these interconnected rings. But it's got to be about more than just how they look, right?
Yeah, for sure. Think about it. These tow hooks, they're the lifeline between the two planes. Any kind of failure there, and the consequences could be, well, they could be pretty bad. So with that Schweitzer hook, that pre-flight inspection is super detailed. They're looking at everything, any little sign of damage, cracks, bending, anything like that. They got to make sure that all those parts, the ones on that pivot bolt, they all move freely. And then there's the release arm, how it engages, the condition of that rubber spacer that helped everything move smoothly, and of course the release cable itself, can't forget that.
And all those checks, they don't stop just because you got in the cockpit, do they?
Nope, not at all. So now the tow pilot, they're inside the plane, right? It's got to make sure nothing's blocking that manual release lever. Can't be rubbing against the seat or anything that might prevent it from working correctly. And they've got to make sure, like with their own hands, that the whole assembly of the release handle and where that cable connects, that it's all rock solid, totally secure, but just looking isn't enough.
I was going to say, there's got to be some hands-on making sure it actually works kind of thing, too.
Yeah, exactly. They hook up the tow line, put it under tension, and get someone else who knows what they're doing, someone right there in the tow plane, to pull the release. Got to see that line detached cleanly, reliably every time. After that, they hook it back up, give it a good tug, make sure that whole release assembly stays closed tight, no accidental openings during the tow. Any problem at all during these steps? Well, that tow plane is grounded. Safety first, always.
Makes sense. So the Troth hook now, that's got to have its own set of things to check, right? Like different mechanisms, same goal, I guess.
Right, the toast hook, yeah, it's a little different on the inside. So the check, before you even use it, it's making sure those release hooks, they open up all the way when you pull that lever in the cockpit. They should actually touch the toe ring. That's how you know it's good. Then the checks you do in the cockpit, those are pretty similar to the Schweitzer. Make sure the lever moves smoothly, the handle's on there good, cables attached right. But big thing with the toast is you got to make sure it cops back to fully closed and locked when you let go of the lugger. Got to spring back, Then it's checking for dirt, corrosion, any of that stuff that could mess it up. And one specific thing, got to make sure that tow rope has the right ring on the end, one that fits the toast. Now the source is real clear about this. If a toast hook is acting up even a little, it's got to go back to the factory for repair. Can't tow until it's perfect. And that really shows you how seriously they take a safety here. No messing around when it comes to a critical part like that. Got to meet the factory standards, got to be absolutely reliable. It really speaks volumes about their commitment to safety.
Yeah, I see what you mean. No cutting corners there. And speaking of connections, we got to talk about what that hook actually connects to. The tow ring. The source makes it super clear. You got to inspect this thing carefully, too.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial. The tow ring, man, it takes a beating during the tow. Any wear and tear at all, scratches, dents, any kind of warp, that ring is out of commission right away. And just like the hooks, you look at figure 12-3, you'll see there are two types, just like the hooks. There's the single ring, 2 inches made of steel, That's for the Schweitzer systems. And then there's those interconnected rings. Those are for the toe stitches. Can't mix and match them.
And here's where it gets interesting, right? It's not just about hooking the ring on. There's this whole compatibility thing going on, which I never would have thought about.
Exactly. The source points this out. A Schweitzer ring, it just won't fit on a toe stitch. Those designs are too different. But here's the real danger. A toast ring, it could actually get hooked onto a Schweitzer hitch by mistake. And because of how that Schweitzer release works, that toast ring might not let go when the tow pilot pulls the release. And that's a serious problem. That kind of hidden detail, it's what makes this whole thing so interesting, and so important to understand. It's like one little thing goes wrong, boom, big problem. That's why they're so careful about inspection.
Makes perfect sense, those sneaky little mismatches. Now let's move on the line, literally, to the tow rope itself. They mentioned that the glider pilot is the main one responsible for picking and checking the rope, which, makes sense. It's attached to their aircraft. But the tow pilot can't just completely ignore it, can they?
Nah, not a chance. That tow pilot, they've got to make sure that tow line and any weak links that might be in there, that they meet the FAA strength requirements, and that they're the right kind for the glider they're towing. The source talks about this more in Chapter 6, but what's important here is, that tow line, it's got to be good, and both pilots got to be on the same page about that. And like anything else that gets used and exposed to the weather, tow ropes don't last forever. You know what I mean? Got to keep an eye on them, replace them when it's time.
Yeah, like it has an expiration date, even if you can't see it. Now, one thing they talk about that the tow pilot has to think about before they even get going, before they even start rolling down the runway, is density altitude. For anyone who might not be totally up on that, why is this so important for a tow plane?
Okay, so density altitude, it's basically like how high the airplane feels like it's flying. Temperature, humidity, and the air pressure all play a role. So hotter temps, more humidity, lower air pressure, all that means higher density altitude. For the tow plane, this is a big deal. It means the engine can't make as much power and the propeller doesn't work as well. So picture this. It's a hot, sticky day. Even if the airport's at sea level, the plane might feel like it's way up in the mountains. It makes a huge difference in how much runway you need to take off and how fast you can climb. The tow pilot, they got to do the map, figure out how the plane's going to perform based on the density altitude right then and there. It's a big decision point. Like, can we even do this safely?
It's all about having enough oomph to get both planes up in the air, right? And doing it within the space you got on that runway. Okay, so now let's imagine they're ready to actually go fly. One of the first things they got to do is the abort briefing. Seems like a pretty important conversation to have.
Oh, yeah, this is huge. It's like, got to have this down pat before you even start rolling. So the tow pilot, they've already figured out how much runway they need, right? Based on the conditions, that density altitude we were talking about. Then they pick a spot on the runway, a physical point, and that's the abort point. Figure 12:4 shows what I mean. And this point, it's set in stone. The tow pilot tells the glider pilot exactly where it is, what they're going to do if they haven't lifted off by that point. The rule is simple. If the tow plane isn't in the air by the abort point, glider's got to release, whether they do it themselves or the tow pilot does it for them. Tow plane keeps going, takes off on itself.
Makes total sense to me. Got to have that clear decision point. And this isn't just like a best practice or whatever, is it? This is like a regulation thing.
Yep. Straight from the rule book. Easy. 14 CFR 91.309.5 is right there. It says the pilot's got to agree beforehand, on the big picture stuff, what signals they'll use for takeoff, for release, what speeds they're going to fly at, and what they'll do if things go wrong. That abort briefing, that's a big part of getting on the same page. And the source really stresses, like, if anything's unclear at all about the tow, both pilots, they got to talk it out. Make sure everything's crystal clear before they even start.
Yeah, communication, it's like the foundation of safe flying, no matter what you're doing. So even before they taxi out to the runway, the tow pilot's got to be thinking about things back on the ramp, right? It's not just about the takeoff itself.
Right, you got to be aware of everything going on around you. The tow pilot's got to think about that prop blast, which way it's blowing. Can't be endangering folks on the ground or messing up glider canopies or other planes, all that wind and debris flying around. Whenever they can, they should position the plane so that blast is pointing away from where people and equipment are. And if it's a non-powered airport, one of those with a C-tab, they got to be on that frequency, announcing what they're doing before they head out to the runway to hook up with the glider and take off. Lets everyone know what's going on.
Just good practice, keeping everybody in the loop. Now, when it's time to actually hook up and get moving, they've got those ground signals to think about. The source mentions those standard American soaring signals, but also says sometimes the local procedures are the ones that matter most.
That's right. There's a whole set of hand signals, pretty well known, that the pilots use to communicate on the ground. But the tow pilot, they really got to know whatever signals they use at that particular glider operation or club. Could be slightly different from the standard one, so you got to be up to speed on that. Might have to watch the signals in their mirrors or even have a designated signal person, standing safely off to the side, relaying instructions from the glider pilot. The horse mentions Chapter 7 if you want to see what those standard signals look like. Pretty important stuff for clear communication.
So, got to be adaptable, got to learn the local customs. It's all part of being a tow pilot. Now let's get to the fun part, the takeoff and climb. Our source says the tow pilot's got to smoothly but quickly advance the throttle. Why is that technique so important?
Oh, that smooth, quick throttle to full power. Yeah, you can see it in Figure 12.5. It's super important to keep that glider from overrunning the tow line. If the tow plane takes its sweet time getting up to speed or even hesitates, the glider, which is usually lighter and starts rolling easier, it can actually catch up. That can make the tow line go slack, and then it can snag on the glider's landing gear or get tangled up in other parts. And if that happens, the glider pilot might not be able to release the tow line. Talk about a dangerous situation right off the bat. Got to keep that line nice and taut from the start. That's the key.
And then, as they're speeding up, getting close to lamped-off speed, that's when the tow pilot has to be really aware of that ground effect thing, right? That change isn't exactly seamless, I hear. The way the plane handles, it actually changes.
You got it. When the tow plane lifts off, it's leaving ground effect. That's like this cushion of air close to the runway, gives you extra lift, reduces drag. And when you leave that, well, the plane's aerodynamics, they change in a few key ways. It needs a higher angle of attack, that's the angle between the wing and the oncoming air, to get the same lift at the same speed. And then there's induced drag, the drag that happens as the wing is making lift, that increases, and you need more power from the engine to keep your speed up. And then sometimes you lose a bit of longitudinal stability that can make the nose want to pitch up, and you might see the airspeed jump up a little because the static pressure around the fuselage changes. The source makes a really important point. Trying to take off before you're supposed to, when you're still in ground effect, that can have really dangerous. The plane might feel like it's flying, but as soon as you climb out of ground effect, it's performance tax. Could stall, you could lose control. Not good.
So don't be in a hurry to get off the ground. Got to wait till it's right. Gotcha. Now, usually in a normal tow, which one lifts off first, the glider or the tow plane?
Almost always, it's the glider. It's way lighter. It needs a lower speed to take off. The tow pilot, they should be ready for that and know that the glider pilot's going to be making adjustments to deal with any crosswind until the tow plane gets in the air, too. But once the tow plane's up, the tow pilot's focus, it shifts right away to watching how high that glider is getting.
Right, because if that glider gets too high, that can be a big problem for the tow plane, can't it?
Absolutely. If the glider climbs too high above the tow plane, it's pulling up on that tow line, and that can actually lift the tail of the tow plane. The horse said even full up elevator, pulling back on the stick as hard as you can might not be enough to fight that force. The only thing the tow pilot can do is pull that release handle. Got to separate the two planes right away. They even give you a rule of thumb. If the glider's 20 feet higher than you and you've got that standard 200-foot rope, you're in a really dangerous situation. The tow plane could pitch up and become uncontrollable.
Yeah, that makes the danger crystal clear. So both planes are up, the climb's going. There are still procedures and things to think about even then, right? It's not just sit back and relax.
Oh no, you got to be on it all the time. So after you get a good, safe lift-off, the main thing the tow pilot's focusing on is keeping that airspeed steady during the climb. Just like the POH, the pilot's operating handbook, tells you to do. And they want the glider to stay right in the tow plane's wake, usually a bit above and behind. Once they're high enough to clear the ground and any obstacles, the tow pilot can start making some gentle turns, nothing too crazy, maybe 15, 20 degrees of bank. Got to follow that planned departure route, got to get away from the airport.
And managing the engine during that long climb, that's pretty much straightforward, I'd guess.
Usually, yeah, you're climbing at full throttle. Got to get the best climb rate, unless the POH says something different for your specific plane. And you want to lean that mixture, the fuel air mix in the engine. Got to follow the POH's recommendations there. Make sure the engine's giving you all the power it can at that altitude and temperature. Now, here's a big safety point. Every glider, every model, it's got to publish maximum Aerotow speed. And the tow pilot, they absolutely got to know that speed and respect it. The glider I'm towing today, for instance, it can't go over 80 knots. Figure 12.6, it gives you examples for a bunch of gliders, like those Blanik L23 and L13, even the single-seater ones like the SGS 126 and ASK 21. You'll see those maximum tow speeds. Sometimes they're pretty close to the slowest speed the tow plane can safely fly at.
Sounds like walking a tightrope a little. Got to keep the tow plane safe. Got to stay within the glider's limits. So how do you actually figure out what that safe tow speed is?
It's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between a bunch of factors. Got to think about the slowest speed you can fly and still keep the engine cool enough. Got to think about the tow plane stall speed. Got to keep a safe margin there. And the big one, of course, is that glider's maximum aerotow speed. Got to stay below that. What you're really trying to do is fly as slow as you can safely while still letting the glider pilot keep things nice and stable. If you're towing a glider you've never towed before, the source says, get a good briefing from someone who knows that glider. Ask them about the minimum, maximum, and best towing speeds. An experienced tow pilot, they can also get a feel for the right speed just by looking at the glider's wings in their mirrors. If they see more of the underside of the wing than usual, that usually means the glider is flying at a high angle of attack, might be getting close to stalling. That's the cue to speed up a little bit.
So it's like they're reading the glider's mind, or at least its aerodynamics, through those mirrors. Pretty cool. Now, thinking about things that can go wrong, which is always important in aviation, that initial climb area, that's got to be important strategically too, right? Like from an emergency planning point of view.
Yeah, think about it. Those low-altitude emergencies, like if the tow plane's engine quits, they're most likely to happen right after takeoff. So that initial climb, it's got to be within gliding distance of the airport. Got to give that glider pilot the option of getting back to the field if the tow goes south. And they shouldn't fly in a way that would make it hard for the glider to get back to the airport's traffic pattern if they have to release or the rope breaks, especially if there's a headwind. Flying too far downwind or crosswind early on, that really limits the glider's options for a safe return.
Makes sense to always have a plan B, especially when you're dealing with an airplane that can't just turn around and land anywhere. Now, what about how that glider moves around behind the tow plane during a normal tow, when everything's going smooth? Can the tow pilot just assume it'll stay put?
Well, a good glider pilot, one who's thinking ahead, they'll usually let the tow pilot know if they're going to do anything fancy. You got to be ready for anything, stay alert. The source mentions this maneuver called boxing the wake. It's a training thing sometimes. Basically, the glider pilot drops down below the tow plane's wake, gets out of that turbulent air, then comes back up to the normal tow position. It's practice. The source says if the tow pilot sees this happening, they got to keep flying straight and level, no sudden moves, Just give the glider a nice, stable platform to practice on.
So steady as she goes from the tow plane. That's the best way to support the glider in that case. What about those procedures for recovering from a flak tow line, those things they teach glider students? How does that play into the tow pilot's awareness?
That's one of those specific training maneuvers, teaches the students how to handle a loose tow line, how to get rid of the slack without jerking the rope or breaking it. So usually the instructor might have the student climb a little off to one side of the tow plane and then kind of dive back down, and that'll make some slack in the line on purpose. Then the student practices getting rid of that slack, nice and smooth. What the tow pilot's got to remember, and the source makes this clear, is that they shouldn't think this is an actual accidental release. Chapter 8, I think it covers that maneuver more from the glider pilot side of things.
Right. Got to know the difference between practice and a real emergency. Gotcha. Now let's talk about the different tow positions themselves. I always thought the glider was just behind and a bit above the tow plane, but I guess there are other ways to do it.
Yep, there are. That position, the high tow, where the glider's a little higher and behind, that's definitely the standard one, the most common one you'll see. But sometimes the glider pilot might want to use a low tow, like for long cross-country flights. Figure 12-7, it shows you how both positions keep the glider out of that turbulent air coming off the tow plane's wings, the wake turbulence, and the low tow. Sometimes it can actually save fuel for the tow plane on those long flights, so it's good for that too.
Makes sense. Got to stay out of that bumpy air. So what about turns? When you're tow-in, it can't be as simple as just turn to the wheel, right? You got to think about how the glider is going to react.
You're telling me. Turns on tow, yeah, you got to be careful. Wait till you're at a safe altitude, clear of the ground and everything. Think about airspace, terrain, wind gradient. Wind can affect the two planes differently because they're at different altitudes, and turbulence, that's always a factor. Plus, gliders and tow planes, they don't turn at the same rate. Gliders usually roll a bit slower, so any turn, got to do it smooth and gradual, no more than 15, 20 degrees of bank tops. The tow pilot's got to expect that glider pilot to work to stay behind the tow plane, match the turn, even if the glider's a little slower to roll.
Smoothness and coordination, key to a happy tow. Got it. Now, let's say they're getting close to their altitude, or maybe they're near a thermal, that rising column of air. That's when the release procedure comes in. There's a standard way to do this, right? A way everyone expects it to go.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to communication. Knowing what the other pilot's going to do. And during the whole climb, the tow pilot's looking at the wind, trying to figure out the best spot to release the glider. The main goal is to release them so they can glide back to the airport. Got to consider the wind for that. It's also good for the pilots to chat about the release point before they even take off. And if they get into a routine, using the same tow pattern for releases, that can really help the glider pilot plan what they're going to do after they let go.
And the release itself, it's not just see you later, right? There are steps to follow. Figure 12.8 lays it out pretty clear. What are those steps?
All right, so first thing, you want to have a little bit of tension on the tow line right before the glider pilot pulls the release. That tension, the tow pilot can feel it through the controls. And if they're looking in the mirror, they might see a little wrinkle in the line, just a change in how it looks. Second step, the tow pilot's thinking ahead. They expect the glider pilot's going to turn right after they release. Got to be ready for that, but also got to keep an eye out in case the glider does something unexpected. And then third step, once the tow pilot's sure that glider's off the line and out of the way, they look left, make sure there's no traffic coming at them, and then they start their turn back to the airport. It's a descending left turn medium bank.
That's a pretty well-defined sequence, predictable. Everyone knows what to expect. But what happens if the glider lets go when there's slack in the tow line? That could get a little hairy, couldn't it?
Yeah, that can make things tricky. So if there's no tension on the line, maybe because of turbulence or the shifted position for a second, the tow pilot might not feel that tug when the glider releases, and they might not even see it in the mirror. That's why the source really stresses this. The tow pilot, they shouldn't start that left turn till they've seen for sure with their own eyes that the tow line is disconnected. If there's any doubt at all, got to play it safe, keep flying straight ahead, and try to confirm the release. Talk to the glider pilot on the radio or try to get a better look. Rushing into the descent without knowing for sure, that's asking for trouble.
Better safe than sorry, especially when you're up in the air. Now glider's away doing its thing. The tow pilot, they got to get the tow plane back down on the ground. Anything special about the descent, approach, and landing for a tow plane after a glider tow?
Yes, be smart about how you manage that engine coming down. Big practice is to reduce power gradually and keep the airspeed reasonable. The source actually points out that flying too fast on the way down can be worse for the engine than reducing power. It can cause thermal shock. So things like steep spirals, full flaps if you got them, slip and turns, those can help you get down without cooling the engine too fast. Some tow planes even have cowl flaps that you can close to control the coolant. It all depends on what you're flying, so check that POH.
So it's not just pointing down and going, you got to be thinking ahead about the engine. What about the flight path, the route you take? Any concerns about other planes in the area?
Oh yeah, definitely. Tow planes, they often descend pretty steeply, get back to the airport efficiently, but that can increase the risk of running into someone else, especially near the airport where it's busy. The source suggests that tow pilots, maybe they should think about using specific descent corridors or preferred rates back to the airport that avoid areas where gliders are usually flying or where other planes are coming and going. It's like trying to untangle the traffic a bit. Makes things safer for everybody.
Makes perfect sense. Got to keep things organized up there. Now, coming into land, that tow plane's still got that 200-foot rope hanging off the back. That's got to be something to think about on final right.
Oh, for sure. That tow line, it's not just hanging straight down, it's at an angle, maybe 30, 40 degrees. So the tow pilot's got to be really careful about their altitude on final. Got to make sure that line clears anything on the ground, trees, power lines, fences, all that, especially near the runway. They got to know about those obstacles, how high they are, where they are, or get a good briefing before they go. And when they're talking before the flight, they should discuss that minimum clearance, how low can you go over those things, and any factors that might make it hard to judge your altitude, like unfamiliar terrain or those optical illusions that can mess with your perception.
So that's another thing to be aware of, another layer of thinking on final. So what about landing with the tow line still attached? Is that ever done?
Well, the spirits, the regulations, they don't say you can't do it. But the source, it lays out the few things you got to be absolutely sure of. Number one, the big one. You got to clear everything on the ground by more than the length of the tow line. And I mean, really clear it, like factor in any bag in your altimeter. Second, only think about doing this on long runways, at least 2,500 feet. And you got to have clear approaches, no obstacles in the way. And then what the runway's made of, that matters too. Dragging the line on grass, that's usually not too bad. But if you land on pavement, that friction can really wear out the line. You could even break it.
So not really something you want to do unless you absolutely have to. What's the usual way to deal with that tow line before landing?
Most of the time, what they do is release that tow line over a designated area near where the gliders launch while they're on a short final to the runway. The important thing is you got to have a specific spot to drop that line. Got to be away from where planes are taxiing or taking off. And the ground crew, they got to know where that drop zone is, got to stay clear. And one more thing, safety thing, if the tow pilot sees anyone in that drop zone, they got to go around. Can't drop the line till it's clear.
Safety first. Got to make sure nobody on the ground gets hurt. Now, the source also talks about cross-country tows, those flights that go a lot farther. Got to be a whole different ball game, planet-wise, right?
Oh, yeah, totally different. Safe cross-country tow-in takes a ton of planning beforehand. The tow pilot's got to figure out how much fuel they'll need based on how long the flight's going to be and how high they'll be flying. Got to really study that route, using those sectional charts, figure out where they can land if there's bad weather or they have a mechanical problem. And you got to make sure the whole flight's going to be legal, following all those airspace rules and stuff. Figure 12.9, it shows you what a typical cross-country tow might look like, gives you an idea of the distances involved.
And it's not just about the airplane and the route, is it? The terrain they're flying over, that matters too, especially for the glider?
Yeah, definitely. There's always a chance that tow line could break, even if it's rare. So the tow pilot, they got to plan that route over terrain where the glider could make an emergency landing if it had to. Try to avoid, huge forests or crazy mountains. And then there's the human factor. Got to make sure both pilots are up for it, physically and mentally, especially if you're a long flight. Might need to plan some stops along the way to rest, and make sure everyone's hydrated and, taken care of. And using the trim on the tow plane, that's really important too. Helps you keep that speed steady without wearing yourself out.
And all that distance, all that terrain, that's got to make communication between the planes super important.
Absolutely. Gotta have a good two-way radio communication. That's key for safe cross-country tows. The source makes a good point. If the glider is using a handheld radio instead of one built into the panel, you gotta check those batteries, make sure they got enough juice for the whole flight. And check the batteries in the tow plane's radio too, of course, or in the glider's main battery if that's what powers the radio. Doing a radio check, making sure you can hear each other good, that should be standard before any cross-country tow. Figure 12.9, it kind of highlights that communication thing, shows you how vital it is.
Makes sense. Got to stay in touch, especially over long distances. Okay, so we got to talk about emergencies. Can't avoid that in aviation. The source, it has a whole section on things that can go wrong during tows, starting right from the takeoff.
Yep, and like we talked about before, that abort briefing, that's really emergency planning right there. Before they even move, gotta have a plan for what to do if things go sideways. That includes picking a spot on the runway, an emergency release point where the